Hey, welcome to week 5. We're already a little past midway.
Oh my god.
Yeah, so half the lessons are almost over. And we're finally going to talk about color. So if you signed up for this class, probably you wanted to hear about color. And it's now week 5 and we're just going to begin really diving into color.
Finally. Yeah.
It's not my fault. Hopefully you're starting to understand. We really just want to lay a solid foundation, really understanding value, observing, and this kind of diffuse neutral light setup, and really understanding those elements before getting into color. Value is a part of color, though, just to be clear. It's just that this is the first time we're really going to focus on color.
Color is a fascinating thing. We talked about lighting, value, edges, and all those things. The basic stuff, just so we can understand colors even better. And it's a fascinating part of picture making because it can really influence the tone and the feeling of it very much.
Yeah, and I think just like everything else, color is a very subjective thing, almost, and there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Hopefully, the way we talk about it will be a little bit different than what you might have heard before, or it might not be. Maybe but we're hoping that'll help regardless, this conversation that we're about to have about color. We know it might be a little bit frustrating because color is a fickle thing that I think is frustrating to deal with. Hang in there. Being frustrated definitely means that you're being challenged with new ideas, new things, and you're trying out new things. It's going to be a little frustrating.
If you're not frustrated, that means it's not good.
Maybe you should be teaching the course.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, let's dive in. Okay, we're going to talk about color.
Right. Our favorite subject.
Is it?
Well, one of.
Yeah, you're right. So let's kind of review what we know about color a bit. We've talked before about the hue, saturation, and value. Today we'd like to also talk a little bit about temperature. But maybe we start with kind of what we know, review what we know, just to go over it. It can't hurt. So hue really is the chroma. What I like to think of is if we had a box of crayons, words you might use to describe the colors, that's usually relates to the hue. So
red, orange, and yellow, totally. Green, yep,
blue. So that's hue. If we take one of those colors, we could talk about saturation. Saturation is basically the amount of chroma, the amount of color. On the left side being a very saturated red. On the right side, what I would say describe as a neutral, or it's white. So all the value of all these are exactly the same.
Right.
But the saturation is different. So what happens if we talk about value? Value is the brightness of a color. So we've taken the neutral on the right side and explore all the values, which is our black and white and grays.
Yeah.
Now, if we took that and kind of added saturation to it, so now we've got hue, saturation, and value, we'd have a chart that looks something like this.
Right.
Up and down is kind of value changing.
Yep.
Left to right, right to left is saturation changing. So, if we picked a random square on here, we could kind of point in the middle here somewhere and say, that's like a 50% value, and if we go right in the middle, 50% saturation.
Yep.
So it's an interesting chart. So temperature is something new. Temperature is basically a color being warm or cool, which is can be a very abstract idea.
Yep.
But much like a term like light or dark, warm or cool is basically used to describe color relationships. We can get into this a little bit more, but much like you might look at like a 50% gray and say, is that a light color or a dark color? It's difficult to tell until you look at another color in contrast to another color. And then you might say, oh, that's lighter or darker than. So warm and cool is very similar. You describe it in the context, you use the term warm or cool in the context of looking at other colors in relationship to each other.
I see.
So a good example of that is this orange and blue, which happen to be complementary colors. And complementary colors are colors that sit opposite each other on the color wheel. But it's great because I think, we look at we look at orange and we would describe it definitely as a warm color.
Yeah.
And we look at blue and we would definitely describe that as like a cool color.
Yeah. And
obviously a good correlation with this is temperature, as in hot or cold, as in a pot that, a fire that's warm and ice that's cool. Is a way to simply think about it.
Right.
But it gets more complicated when we look at neutrals.
Right.
Is this warm or cool? Looking at it naked like this, I might describe it as, oh, that's a warm gray.
Yeah.
And to reinforce that, if it was an environment like this, surrounded by a cooler color, I would definitely say now that almost looks orange. It's very warm. Now on the flip side of that, take the same gray and put it in the context of this warm orange color.
Same gray.
Same gray.
Wow.
You might describe the square now as cool in contrast to the warm.
Yes. Yeah. So it's important that it's not so much of each color has a definition of warm or cool, but we always want to use it as, is it warmer or cooler? It's a tool to sort of judge your color next to, or compared to another color. And that's a really strong tool, especially when you're dealing with subtle color shifts. And if you're confused in terms of what color to use, you always want to just use this tool. Is it warm or is it cool? Is it cooler? Is it warmer?
And overall, with all of these things, hue, saturation, value, temperature, color is always relative. We're always talking about color in context.
Yes.
Not in isolation necessarily, because it's about these relationships. So let's look a little bit deeper into this. What does that exactly mean? So here we have a red square and a green square, and in it is this
Same
neutral.
gray.
Actually, so that's what's interesting about it, is to the naked eye, I think it looks like the same gray. But if we took these red and green and went away and put a neutral there, it actually turns out that they're pretty different from each other. And I think that is a good way to remind ourselves that always it's about relationships. So even the fact that these colors are basically being influenced by colors that it's being surrounded by is a good reminder when we're observing to always remember to carefully study these relationships and to capture the relationships. It's not important that you capture the exact color that you see in nature so much as the relationship to each other.
Good point.
So let's talk a little bit about how other people might have broken down color relationships over time. One way is color harmony. This is something that I learned in school, color theory. We took a color theory class. You look at all sorts of different swatches of colors, and you talk about this abstract idea of color harmonies. Like what makes color work together?
Right. Yeah. This is an interesting thing. Both Robert and I have done a lot of color work, and especially me, I've been given this color art directing roles in my career, and everybody asks like, how do you find the good colors? And I'm like, there's no good colors. There's a good combinations.
Or they're all good colors.
They're all good colors.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really say one is good and one is bad. And this color harmony thing is an interesting thing. And definitely, like, when people talk about color theory, I start to get really kind of nervous, because there's no answer, in my opinion, to those theories. except that it's good to understand what they mean. Like, for example, like complementary colors, the opposite colors in the color wheel, it is important to understand what that means. Basically, blue and orange, they are opposite, which means in the category of hue, they create this contrast. They're the farthest color contrast that you can have in terms of hue. But of course, there's a value, there's a saturation that come in play. But it's good to know. It's good to know what that means. Primary colors, split, complementary. I have no idea what that is, really. But yeah, all these things that it's not a bad thing to know.
And also, this is not all of it, right? This is just 4 different color harmonies that people have talked about. Right. You guys can do a Wikipedia search, a Google search, and see all the different color harmonies people talk about. I mean, in other words, really, to be honest, color harmony is very, very much a subjective thing. These rules are in place. I don't think they're bad things. I just think that they are rules and ideas that can hopefully help people understand color harmony, or when they're stuck and something's not working, you can kind of turn to it and say, oh, maybe it's because, I picked a color that just has no relationship in a way to the other colors. But to be honest, it's not this. It's sort of the thing that is more of a way to think about color than it is the only way to think about color. And when we think of a blue sky, for instance, we always think blue sky. And overall, we think, skies are kind of blue. Sometimes they're pink, I guess. But, are they ever green? I don't know. Are they ever, kind of yellow? I don't know. And you actually came up with this color wheel, which is, a color wheel. And an interesting thing about it is each of these colors are selected from a sky, right?
Granted, from different times of the day and stuff like that. But the point is that what we think of the color of sky or any object out there, it may not be the only color. Like, basically, sky can create any color. And it's important that we observe and explore the possibility of colors instead of saying, this is the color of, the color of this object is this, or this color represents this emotion. It just never works like that. It's very subjective.
Let's look at paintings that, we're actually looking at paintings Dice has done over time. This is a painting you did for Monsters University. Now, obviously, we could sit down, and a very obvious thing is you have these strong orange and strong blue, I would say, colors, and we could say, it's a complementary colors at work here, which wouldn't be not true. But I actually want to ask, because you're the one who created this painting, is that what you thought about when you started this? Like, I'm going to do a complementary color lighting setup, so there's a blue light and an orange light, and that's what I'm going to do.
No, I had no intention. Actually, I just wanted to find the right balance that felt right for the mood of this painting to me. And obviously I have to pitch it to the director to make sure that's what he likes. But like we said, it's in a way subjective. Someone may find it not a good combination. Someone might have picked the green instead of blue. But to me, this worked for this particular scene. And hopefully a lot of people, the audience, can relate to that decision that I made.
Absolutely. Let's look at this is kind of a good entry point painting. Like, I can look at this and say, I kind of understand how the harmony here is kind of working. It feels very harmonious.